Contrary to popular belief, there are some scenic train rides you can take in the US. I've been taking train rides since 2021 and I've taken the most scenic train rides in the country. And if you're curious on which scenic train ride is best for you, you need to keep watching this video. Hi, I'm Sojourner and I am an avid train traveler when I'm not working remotely as a social worker, and train travel has become one of my favorite, if not my #1 choice of travel when it is accessible. And after taking the most scenic train rides in the US, or at least the top 3 that we have to offer, I wanted to do a video giving you the tips on the ins and outs of these routes, the roomette life, my opinion on the food on the train, comparing and contrasting the different views you can see to make the most informed decision on what train ride you want to splurge on. And the first one I want to talk about, and my first scenic train ride ever, was the California Zephyr from Chicago to Emeryville, California. This ride is 52 hours if you take it the entire time. However, the most scenic part of this train ride starts in Denver and ends roughly in Sacramento. Coming from the Midwest, it is a super mountainous train ride. We don't have mountains over here, so I was really enthralled being on the train, seeing all of the mountains, going through the Rocky Mountains and seeing the Sierra Nevada mountains. There were tons of trees and you go through the forest, and it was a beautiful train ride, and I can see why it is #1. As far as my experience being a Black solo female traveler on the train, I loved it. I think it was the best all-around train ride I have done. If you're looking for good all-around food, which does vary based on Amtrak's menu, I thought the breakfast, lunch, and dinner options were really delicious. Seeing how it was my first train ride, I didn't have much to compare it to, but now that I've taken about 3 or 4 of them, this one definitely had the better menu options for each meal. There was French toast, tortellini, desserts, and of course you get your wine when you book the roomette too. Out of all the trains I'll be talking about, it also has the most mountainous views. So if you're someone who wants to ride through the mountains or prefers that instead of a more coastal beachy view, I think you will really love this train ride. And prices can vary. I always believe in splurging for the longer train rides, which can cost anywhere from $400 to $800. And on this route, it was also the most expensive of them all, costing around $800 one way for a roomette. But again, if you aren't a solo traveler, you can easily split that roomette with a friend, family member, etc. to lower down the cost, or you can take the most scenic part of the ride only, which is from Denver to Sacramento. The second train ride I would recommend as one of the best scenic train rides in the US is the Amtrak Coast Starlight. The Coast Starlight is one for my West Coasters, or if you are someone who frequently travels to LA and wants to go up to the PNW or the Pacific Northwest, then this is definitely a ride you should have on your bucket list. With the Coast Starlight, you can start in LA and go to Seattle or Portland, or go the other way, vice versa. The entire route is 35 hours, but I would say the most scenic part of the route is definitely the first day. Right when I got on the train, we were immediately sat for lunch, and also that is the most scenic time of the train ride. So if you book this train ride and you're taking a middle of the day, noon-ish or later train, they will probably seat you and have you eat immediately. But the best part about that was we got a great view from our dining car without having to go find a seat in the observation car, which is another plug to book the roomette. The highlight of the Coast Starlight is riding along the coast. You ride along the Pacific Coast Highway, and it's crazy because you are literally on the edge. So there are some parts of this ride where it seems like you're right by the water, but there is a bit of sand. You ride through the middle of town like San Luis Obispo and a bunch of other California towns that are on the route up to Seattle. This was the only scenic train ride I've done in the US that I wasn't solo. I actually went with my sister and we shared a roomette, which was definitely an experience. As someone who is used to having the roomette to myself, it did feel a bit cramped to have 2 people in there, though I know there are other couples and families who I've met on the train who love booking the roomette together. But if that doesn't sound comfortable for you, you could also upgrade and book the bedroom, but just know it will be more monies. And because I went with my sister, it was also the first scenic train ride where I didn't sleep on the bottom bunk. Normally as a solo traveler, they only take down the bottom bed for you and they don't take down the top bunk. But considering there were 2 of us and that top bunk is actually way smaller than the bottom bunk, I took one for the team and slept on the top bunk. And I will say it was a bit snug. I felt more comfortable normally when I sleep on the bottom bunk. That is something to keep in mind if you are booking any of these scenic train rides and you're someone who isn't traveling solo. Y'all are gonna have to do rock, paper, scissors for these bunks. And as far as food on the Coast Starlight, it was a bit different from the California Zephyr, and I know Amtrak does change their menus every so often. So I recommend actually going to the Amtrak website before you take the trip just to see what the menus are currently looking like. But for me on the Coast Starlight, when I took it in 2022, the food really wasn't a highlight for me like it was when I booked the California Zephyr. They aren't super gourmet meals by any means across the board, but the flavor of some of the chicken and other things that I ate on the Coast Starlight just weren't as great. Though I did have a really good chicken salad. So it is kind of hit or miss, but I will say overall the route itself was really smooth. Unlike the California Zephyr, which I was delayed when I took the California Zephyr the first time for 7 hours, the Coast Starlight arrived on time with no issues. The route was absolutely gorgeous. I love the views of the Pacific Coast Highway. Again, I'm a girl from the Midwest. We don't have oceans, so I really enjoy being able to coast right along. And one day I do want to go back and do a road trip, which is what my sister did on her way back down from Seattle. And my sister and I did ride the roomette together in the Coast Starlight, and for both of us it was roughly $600-ish. So of all the train rides I've done, it has been the cheapest for the roomette because I did split it with somebody else. So we only ended up paying $300-ish for our ride. Overall, I really enjoyed the Coast Starlight, and if you're looking for a ride with very coastal views, this is the one I recommend. And the third scenic train ride in the US is the Empire Builder. And I took the Empire Builder from Milwaukee to Portland. However, it actually starts in Chicago and goes all the way to Portland or Seattle. The entire route is roughly 46 to 48 hours, depending upon where you get off. If you aren't in Milwaukee or Chicago and you want to take this route, they do stop in Minneapolis, which makes it pretty accessible for us in the Midwest. The highlight of the Empire Builder is going through Glacier National Park, and I would say the most scenic day of this ride is the second day, in particular the second night and going into the next morning. When you take the Empire Builder, it actually splits after Glacier National Park in the middle of the night, so they arrange you so that you are on the right segment of the train based on where your final destination is. And in my case, when I took the Empire Builder, they split the train between the observation car and the dining car. So because I was going to Portland, I was on the train with the observation car, meaning I got to see the views of Mount Hood and the beautiful forest and very lush green areas of the Pacific Northwest into Washington. But if you go to Portland, you will get the dining car. And if you want to be just on the most scenic part of the Empire Builder, I recommend getting on somewhere in North Dakota or Montana. We did have a fresh air stop in Minot or Minot, North Dakota, so if that's accessible to you, that can be a place for you to get on the train. But if you go on Amtrak's website to go look at all of the routes, you can see all of the stops on each one of these trains that I'm mentioning, and you can decide where you want to go, where you want to get off, and your price will vary based on that. But again, you need to get on this train before they get to Glacier in order to see the beautiful views. And in addition to Glacier National Park, I also got to see a peak of Mount Hood. Again, Midwest girl, we don't have mountains, and so seeing the mountain was really cool. I tried so hard to get a good shot and I was able to see it. So if you're someone who has not experienced much about the PNW, I think this is a great ride to introduce you to what nature looks like in Washington and Oregon. And of all three of these rides, I find the Empire Builder is the most underappreciated. I know some people find this ride kind of boring, but I really enjoyed myself. You go along the Lewis and Clark Trail. Again, you have mountains, you have the very lush forests. For the Empire Builder, I paid just over $700 for my one-way ticket from Milwaukee to Portland, and that was booking the roomette, and I booked that in January or February and took the train ride in May. However, there are always cheaper options. If you want to take a scenic train ride, you would just have to ride in coach. And a bonus scenic train ride that I think is a great connector if you want to do 2 train rides in one trip is taking the Amtrak Cascades from Portland to Vancouver, Canada. The Portland to Vancouver leg of the Amtrak Cascades is roughly 8 hours, but technically it starts in Eugene, Oregon, making it close to 10 and a half, 11 hours if you go all the way to Canada. However, the most scenic part of this ride is from Seattle to Vancouver, Canada, which is roughly 6 hours if there are no delays. The main highlight of that scenic part from Seattle to Vancouver, Canada is Puget Sound. Very similar to the Coast Starlight, except you're not going by the ocean. You're riding past or riding through Puget Sound, which is a combination of basins, tons of wildlife, and also part of the Salish Sea. My experience on the Cascades was from midday into the night, so by the time we got to Vancouver, it was pretty dark, but the way there, you are able to see the gorgeous sunset through Puget Sound. So that is a bonus scenic train ride if you want to add it on to your experience with the Empire Builder. Just make sure that you build at least one day between the two, just in case the Empire Builder is delayed. Which leads me to a few quick reminders if you are taking any of these scenic train rides. The first is to use all of the fresh air stops. When you are on the train for 35 hours or 46 hours or 52 hours, that is a very long time to be sitting. And they do schedule out 30-minute fresh air stops sprinkled around the route. Now, these are not long enough for you to go sightseeing in different cities. I do not recommend going too far from the train because you can get left. People have been left in the middle of their train rides because they thought they had more time, and they aren't going to do this really loud announcement. You have 30 minutes to get on and off the train if you want to stretch your legs. But don't do too much, because if so, you'll be out of luck and in the middle of nowhere. The second tip is to splurge on the roomettes. I know they are expensive. Yes, this I know. However, when you think about how long you're on the train, it is worth it to go splurge on the roomettes. You're getting 2 nights or a night with a bed on a train, and then you're getting all your food included, and of course you're getting all your transportation for those days included. For me, it is worth the price. My third quick tip is to always pack light if you can. Just because you book a roomette does not mean you're going to have more space than other people on the train. The roomettes are nice and they are bigger than sitting in coach. However, they aren't super big to the point where you can stuff your big old suitcase in the room. You will need to put that on the lower level of the train. Amtrak staff can help you a little bit with your bags, but for the most part, they're out kind of walking through the train, so you may not have that same kind of support that you would if you were flying, unless you do book the sleeper car, and then there is an attendant that is around there a bit more than if you were in coach. So of all of these scenic train rides, if you're wondering which is my favorite, of course I love all of them, but I will say if there is one that I think you should absolutely splurge on, it is the California Zephyr. The reviews are right, Google is correct. It is the most scenic train ride in the US, and of all three, I think it had the most magnificent views. While I did love the coastal views of the Coast Starlight, as well as the foresty views and the mountainous views of the Empire Builder, there was something about the California Zephyr that felt very unreal, because on some parts of the train ride you are literally coasting through just forest or just mountains. There is not a lot around you, and it was a beautiful experience to be able to sit there and just take it all in without having to hop out and take photos. Like, the sights came to me and all I had to do was sit there, and I really enjoyed it. I think it is worth the splurge if you have been considering a cross-country train ride, and I think you should absolutely do it at least once if you had to choose from the 4 that I mentioned. So I hope that gave you some inspiration on the many Amtrak train rides that are available. You can go to amtrak.com/train-route to see all of the routes that are on there. They don't tell you which ones are the most scenic, though I do have my blog post about that. And you could also Google and find tons of lists on the most scenic train rides in the US. But these are the ones on Amtrak that I would recommend if you want a slightly longer experience. However, if you look on their website, there are shorter ones if you want to have a shorter experience on the train too. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this helped you make a decision about which Amtrak ride you want to take. And as always, stay curious. Bye, y'all.